welcome to Take Up and Read. My name is Joe Chrisman. I'm your host. I'm joined with my best friend, Chris Weniger. And today we are joined with a very special guest, and that is Pastor Jason Helopoulos, who is the pastor of University Reformed Church in Michigan. And so, Jason, it's a pleasure to have you on. It's been great to know you as a friend and a colleague in the PCA, but we're really excited to talk about some books. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, the whole point of these interviews that we're hoping to do on the channel is to have good conversations with authors that we have been blessed by personally and have impacted our own ministry as we seek to minister to the congregants in our care. And we're hoping to talk about kind of the best books we can and kind of put those before our listeners. And so to that end, we are really excited to talk about several of your books. I want to start, though, with this book. I believe this is the most recent one. Is that correct, Jason? Covenantal Baptism?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
I want to make sure. Is this? There it is. My focus has been on and off during this process. So finally we got it. Covenantal Baptism by Jason Helopoulos. This is in the Blessings of the Faith series. I wanted to ask you, Jason, first and foremost, like, how did this series come about? Because obviously this is a newer series. There's already been, I believe there's 6 books currently. There's 2 books that are about to come out. I know.
Right.
2 new ones that are about to come out. So I just am curious, like, where did this come from? How did this start?
Yeah, I was sitting with a couple of friends, probably, it would have been 10 years ago now. And we were just saying, man, it sure would be great if we just had introductory books to the Presbyterian Reformed world that had a little more substance than we had seen in some of the kind of pamphlet-sized books, but not so in depth that it couldn't be used in a new member class or in a small group or something like that. And just have a number of those books, introductory books. And so that began the conversation years ago, and I really didn't do anything with it. And then it just became more of a burden in my mind that, I want good things to put in the hands of the people that I serve. And then started brainstorming about, man, wouldn't it be good if there was not just, it was a book like that, but if it had questions and answers at the back that were just short and brief, that could be a good section of the book. And I thought that would probably be a good resource, because that's often what you get as a pastor. You know, you get someone comes up to you and they want an answer to a question they have, but they don't want the long answer. They want the paragraph answer. And so if we just had a chapter like that in the back of these books, it'd be good. So I was actually working on that book on baptism and approached P&R about them publishing it. And I was writing that book, and they said, yeah, we would love to do that book. And then I thought, this would be a book in a series like this. So I went back to him and said, what if we made a series out of this? So what would you think of that? And they said, well, we love that idea. So we contracted initially for at least 10. Right now, probably looks like we'll have at least 12 in the series, and we're just kind of seeing where it goes. But it was that, to get good things in people's hands that were just introductory. The other, and one of my heartbeats, is to get men that are good writers, good thinkers in our circles, just out before some of our people that they just aren't familiar with. So they get to know Jonathan Master, and get to know David Strain, and get to know Guy Richard, and get to know John T. Rhodes, and get to know, these guys that are writing for this series are all good theologians, good pastors, good writers, and just men of character. And so wanted to get them out before people too.
Yeah, it's a great series. I've really been blessed by all of the books I've read of it. I think I've read most of them, if not all of them at this point. I saw just recently you guys have, if I'm correct, it's Confessional Presbyterianism is coming out, or
Correct.
Yeah, Confessional Presbyterianism, and then is there a separate book by Sean Michael Lucas just on Presbyterianism on its own? Right?
Yeah. So Confessionalism by Blair Smith will come out, and then Sean Lucas will have a book out on Presbyterianism. And the one that came out right before those was Jonathan Cruz's, was the latest on church membership. So
that was an excellent one. Jonathan's a good friend. That was a really good. I think all of his writing, of course, is good. That book is.
He is a good writer. He is a good writer.
Yes, he's a good writer, and every time I turn around, there's another book by Cruz coming out. So he just
This is true.
prolific
I
writer.
don't think he sleeps. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned, I mean, in this book, you mentioned the question and answer section in the back, and to me, so I mean, I not only personally read this book when it came out, was blessed. I was at the time of trying to remember what was the year that this was published, Jason. This was
Oh, I don't know.
I'm going to open up to the front page 21. So my son had just been born. I was preparing to baptize my son, and I picked it up. Just came out. I said, "Oh, will be great." Kind of devotional as I'm reflecting on baptizing my son, and it was really sweet for me. But I have since given this book out to every family that has come through our church for baptism, and I have found whether you are not on board with infant baptism and you're trying to figure it out, or whether you believe in infant baptism, this book has been really helpful for both camps. Because if you're trying to think through it, the questions and answers are really helpful. Connecting, here's what we mean, here's what we don't mean, and then I thought your section kind of looking at the fourfold witness towards this, the church community. But then you spend so much of the book just talking about what a rich blessing baptism is. And so I thought it was really, really a wonderful resource. I'm sure the answer is yes, but have you received a lot of positive feedback for this book?
There has been a good amount of positive feedback. Yeah.
Good.
It was a joy to write. For most of us, I think like most of us, for me, it was the last domino to fall in the Reformed Presbyterian kind of trajectory that I was on. And it was a huge hurdle for me to get over. And I thought, I can remember, I think I say it in the book, but I can remember sitting in the pew with my wife one day when we were watching a baptism of a covenant child, and the baby started screaming its head off. And I remember elbowing my wife and saying, "See, even that baby knows it shouldn't be baptized." And that's where I was at. And now I find it to be just one of the sweetest truths that the scriptures teach, and just one of the most beautiful practices of our faith. And so it's just a delight to write it and be able to share that with other people.
Yeah, and let me just commend you again. I mean, having something that is substantive but is this thin is
Yes.
incredibly helpful. As you mentioned, kind of the short paragraph answer, wanting something that can actually really get into. I feel like we have lots of really good thick books on arguing the doctrine of a covenantal perspective on baptism, and they're all good and they need to be read. But for the average layperson in the pew, this is something they actually will read cover to cover. And so I'm a big fan of the series. I'm very thankful for this specific book. But I must say, Jason, of all of the books you've written, the articles you've written, everything I benefit from you, this is probably my number one, is Let the Children Worship. And so I really want to know, like, how did you come to a point where you said, you know what, not only do I believe this, but like this is a book that needs to be written, because there is not a whole lot of this out there. So I'm really curious to hear the story of this book.
Yeah. It was going to a church with my family one day, and I walked in, we were visiting a church, and I walked in with my kids, and an usher stopped us and said to me, uh, "This is going to be a PG-13 service. You may not want to bring your kids in." And then he said, and I said, "No, I think we'll still go." And he said, "Well, kids aren't normally in our services anyways." And uh, that that to me was shocking, that anybody would ever get there as a church, let alone that you'd be conveying that as an usher to a family that was visiting. Um, and I had seen such great benefits and fruit from having my own children in worship, though it is often a struggle, but having them in worship, and many of the families that I've had the great privilege of serving over the years, and different churches. And so wanted to write something again that was just simple and also very practicable, that could put in the hands of parents and in the hands of pastors and in the hands of elders that are trying to walk through these things with their congregation or with their families. So that was the goal.
Yeah. This book, I mean, there really isn't, I don't know of another book that's making this case to have children in the corporate gathering for worship on the Lord's Day. And if it does, I mean, to, again, have a short book, it is incredibly substantive in terms of its argument, but it's very readable. It's very accessible. And we have a book table at the church, church plant in Lombard. And so we call it the $0 bookstore. I stole that from T4G. So we have this big table with a bunch of free books, and it's my way of just unashamedly trying to push good books to the congregation. And this one, every time I put a stack of 4 or 5 of these on the table, it just disappears. And early on in the church plant, we found when people would visit, they'd say, "Oh, you're a church plant, you're small, you don't have a lot of volunteers." So the reason you don't have anything for kids right now is because of just necessity. We don't have the capacity. When you guys grow, you'll have the kids programs and the kids church and whatnot. And we kind of said, no, this is a conviction of ours, and hand them this book and say, we'd love to talk more about it. And what we've been really encouraged by is the families that have joined. We've had a number of young families join. And as they have gone through the initial kind of trial period of they're not used to wrangling a child and having the child make noise and maybe feeling a little uncomfortable. Am I distracting the people around me? After they've kind of gotten through that initial trial, the sweetness really does settle in of, we really love that our children are in worship. We just had one family recently say, we just realized our kid can sing the doxology and we have never taught our child the doxology.
Yes.
Because she's in worship. And you use an illustration, I can't remember where exactly in the book, but you said, against the argument that, kids won't pick anything up, they won't understand it. I think you used the line, something like, you don't recall learning how to speak, but you can speak. Like you picked it up. You didn't understand everything as people were talking around you. And the same goes for worship. Like one of the ways that our children will learn what worship is by just worshiping alongside of us. And I think that's a really and wonderful thing. So Jason, I personally want to say thank you because of all the books I've given out in ministry. This is probably the most common. I mean, in terms of quantity of books, I've given out this book more than any other. And so I'm really thankful for this. How's the feedback been on this? Have you received a lot of positive feedback for this as well?
I have, yeah. It also, probably out of all the books, it also is the one that wrangles people the most, and that I've gotten a number of emails from pastors in particular that have struggled as families have read that book and then try and have that conversation with them. And so them wrestling with this and the idea of the change it would have upon their church and just not wanting to entertain that or go through that. And so because it does challenge a lot of what has become the status quo in our evangelical Christian circles. But it has not always been that way. And we've taken for granted that it has been, and it hasn't always been that way. So.
Yeah, it's a rather novel concept. I mean, the idea of we're going to fully segment children during a portion of corporate worship or even the entirety of the service is a rather new invention. And I think this book, again, really helpful resource for pastors if you're listening to be able to walk someone through. And your tone is gracious throughout the whole book. Very persuasive and compelling of here are all the positives and let's just focus on what is the good to be had in all of this. And so I really, really think this is a helpful book. And I hope that more pastors benefit and use it and implement it in their churches because the cost of not having our kids in service is too great, I think.
It really is. It is the chief way that we disciple them in what we say we love the most and is the high point of our week. And if we're not including them in it, we're including them in that moment. We're communicating something to them. And we want to communicate to them, no, you're part of the church and you are also a worshiper before God and you can do this. You can catch things in the service, and you have praise to offer to God and thanksgiving to offer to Him and confession to offer to Him. I was with a group of women just a number of months ago, about 250 or so that had read this book and were starting to work this out in their churches, and that just that delights the bejeebers out of me. I mean, that just, think of all those kids that are getting ready to experience worship, not just for their high school years, but for all the days of their life from the womb. That's exciting to me. So,
Absolutely. Can I ask you just as an application question for this? So obviously, pastors listening to this, let's say the pastor's on board and says, man, I want this. But so many people, when they're checking out church, the first thing they're looking for is kids, activities, programs, what are kids doing during the service. Maybe the congregation has habits already formed in the kind of segmenting kids. Apart from just buying 150 copies of the book for every member of the church, which I think they should do, what would you encourage a pastor who's trying to kind of help this along in his congregation, help his congregation see, no, we really should be bringing our kids into this?
yeah, I think the first two things are, you have to be incredibly patient and slow. And the second is, you have to teach to it. So when I came to this conviction in the first church that I was ordained in, I was their family and youth pastor, and I've apologized to them since. But I taught the elders this, and we walked through it, and they were convinced. And we didn't take the time. I didn't take the time to teach the congregation. We just announced that this is what we were going to do, and there was some pushback, and so I had a little meeting with all the parents one night where all the parents showed up and they offered some of the pushback and their concerns. I listened, and it didn't faze me in the least, and on we went. And that was just bad pastoring on my part. It was unkind, is really what it was. It was too fast. And as I took time to teach the elders and to think through it together biblically and to prayerfully do it, that's how I should have pastored those parents and the congregation. So be patient and take time and teach to it. And most people will see it, and then you patiently and gradually begin to introduce it. You give them outs. So, what we do here is we provide, at University Reformed Church, we provide childcare up until 6 years of age in a service. Because we have a lot of visiting families where, look, they're not used to this. And we have some families that aren't comfortable with it. Okay. But we're going to keep teaching to it and keep encouraging it. But we also provide an out. And that was something, as a young, zealous, young Turk, that I didn't understand in those early days. So,
yeah. I think one of the strongest advocates for it is, once you get families on board, and there's kind of a moment once the congregation kind of tips the majority of families are keeping their kids in, like, they become the best advocates for the visitor or the new member or whatever it may be. Because all of a sudden you've got parents saying, it's not that hard. Let me tell you what we do, and let me encourage it, and let's talk about all the things we are seeing in our kid, as they all of a sudden know the doxology, or they all of a sudden are reciting a verse that they heard from the sermon this past week or whatnot. I find that to be the more compelling. It's not just me teaching all the time, but it's also the congregation is starting to teach themselves a little bit.
Well, and it just becomes the new normal, right? And so the biggest adjustment is for the adults. We have to adjust to it, that, there's noise in the room, and there's this and that. And this Sunday, without thinking about it, it just kind of happened. I was getting up to read the word before I preached, and two kids started screaming in the congregation in one of our services. We have 400 plus kids, and I was just giving them the stats because we had a congregational meeting the other night. But from 0 to 4, we have 119 children. And so there can be a lot of noise going on in the room because most of those children are in the sanctuary. And two of them started screaming when I got up to read the word. And then I'm praying the prayer of illumination before the word. And instead of it being an annoyance to me, it was actually an encouragement. And I just found myself praying before, prayer of illumination, something along the lines of thanking God for the fact that he's moving in our world, and he's active in our world. And even in the gifts of these children, we have a true sign of it, that, as they're yelling out in this room, it's a true sign that you are a God that continues to give good gifts to your people. You've given us our children. It's good reminders. And it just takes us adjusting more than anything. It's not the children, it's us.
Yeah, I think one way that our family has adjusted to that, and this will, I think, segue into the next book that I know Joe's excited to talk about, but it's family worship because, where we're at, we got a 3-year-old, we got an 18-month-old. Family worship is a mess. I mean, it is loud and there are toys. Sometimes they're musical and kids want to run around, and we do it. But
Yes.
But that's been just a great help and preparation for us then in worship as well, where some of that same stuff happens.
That's right. And over time, right? Not every night is. Someone was asking me actually this past week. They said, Jason, when you're preparing sermons, are you, you feel bad when it's not a home run? And I said, listen, I don't know that I ever feel good after I get done preaching, but all I'm going for is I'm trying to get a double each time. I'm just going for a double. And there are times that's a single and it's like, okay. And it's the same thing with family worship over time, right? It's just that consistency over time. You're just trying to hit a few singles and a few doubles, but over time, it has this great benefit. And some nights are just a train wreck, and that's okay. You just pick it up the next night, right? It's a means of grace, and we often forget that. I think it's some kind of performance. It's nothing like that. It's not a weight. It's not a burden that's on our shoulders. It's a means of grace that our gracious God has given to us to minister to us and to conform us more to the likeness of our Savior.
Yeah, I think Michael Horan said they're means of grace, not means of work. And so
yes,
we need to be reminded of that from time to time.
Amen.
I think this particular book is actually a really helpful reminder of that because, again, I feel like now there's a lot of books on family worship. There's within our tribe, there's a lot of books and podcasts, and a lot of people have kind of adopted like, yes, of course we should be doing family worship. I was looking this up. This was published, 2013, 2014. I feel like this was kind of ahead of most of that curve, with most people kind of getting on board and whatnot. This was kind of one of the first really substantive books out there saying, hey, here's what we should do. And what I love about this book, and I'm not speaking any other book that I'm not naming here, but what I love particularly about Neglect of Grace is the gracious pastoral tone, kind of the encouragement to take this up in whatever capacity one can take it up in, and just what you said, over time, slowly have it grow. I'm curious, again, just to kind of hear some of the backstory, like how did you decide to write on this when it wasn't really cool to write on family worship back then?
Yeah. I was a church planter at the time and was pastoring a small congregation, trying to get the church planted. And I was teaching them about family worship because it had a great effect upon my little family unit. And I was looking for a book I could, again, put in their hands, but I wanted something that gave the biblical, gave the theological, and gave the practical, while maintaining, hopefully, that this is a means of grace and with the gracious Spirit. And there are good books out there. I just didn't find something that checked all those boxes for me. And so I had a study leave week one year. They gave me 1 week of study leave each year at this church plant. So that first year, I thought, what did I do on this study leave week? I thought, well, maybe I'll write down my thoughts on family worship. So I took that week and I wrote a rough draft of that book, not knowing it would be a book. And then, you're busy church planning. So I didn't do anything for a whole year. Come back to that second year and got another week. So what do? Well, maybe I pick that thing back up and look at it. So that's what I did. I went back through it and edited it and changed it. And then I'm church planning. So it's another year where I didn't touch it again. And I get back to that third year, and Kevin DeYoung, one of my dearest friends, was a fellow pastor here in town, and I was doing the church plant. He was here at University Reformed Church, and he had published his first book at that point. And so I thought, well, I'm going to send it to him, see if there's anything here. Would you take a look and tell me, do you think there's anything here? He said, yeah, there is. So I spent that third year then contacting publishers on my study leave and talking with editors, and that's how it ended up getting published. But the whole reason of writing it was so I could put something in the hands of the people in the church plant.
That's great. Yeah, I'm very thankful you chose to do it, because it's now blessed a lot of people. So thank you.
Yeah, and Jason, you're kind of describing how that book came about. I'd love to just take a step back a little bit from the specific books that you wrote and just talk a little bit big picture about you and writing and what that's looked like in your ministry. So for you, has writing always been something you thought would be a part of your ministry? Is that something you always wanted to do, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it feels goofy to talk about writing because I don't view myself as a writer. I'm a pastor, and each of these books has just come about because there was something that was on my mind and heart, and I wanted to be able to serve the people that I was serving. What the benefit, though, I found writing over the years is I think it's made me a better preacher. I hope by God's grace, because writing, what it does is it requires you to think more about words. It requires you to think more about how to say things in a pointed way, an engaging way, and I found that shaped my preaching, and I think it's made me a better preacher. The other thing that it has turned into a blessing is that it has a way of, look, I'm a local church pastor. These are the people I've been called to pastor. And yet you can write something one time, like these books that we've talked about, and it goes out there and it can minister to tens of thousands of people that you'll never see, never touch. And if the Lord uses that, that just feels like an incredible blessing to me, that he would choose to use something like that in the lives of other people. So
Jason, it sounds, as I'm hearing you talk, as I've even read all of your books, and all of the subjects are, I mean, they're explicitly pastoral, ministry related. We could mention the New Pastor's Handbook, helping young pastors pastor more effectively, biblically, faithfully. Seems like for you, ministry, or rather writing, is very much a direct outflow from your ministry.
yes.
It's not kind of this separate thing I've got over here and I'm doing my ministry, but this is one-to-one a outflow of my ministry. And so I'm just curious to hear, like, as you think about writing as part of your ministry, and you even just kind of touched on it with the idea of like this can go out, that kind of starts with your local congregation. Do you think, is that how all pastors should we be thinking of when we think of writing, rather than try to aspire to write books? I feel like, especially as a younger pastor, a lot of young guys come into ministry and writing a book is viewed as almost kind of like a goal. A lot of guys I know want to write books. It sounds like as you're talking, seeing the books you've written, you would say, focus on the ministry, let the writing kind of come from that. Is that accurate? How would you encourage kind of a young guy who's thinking about, maybe I feel passionate about writing, feel like maybe I'm called to write something? What kind of encouragement or advice would you give him?
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I think there is there's a desire by some to write because they want to get a book out there, and it is one of the few kind of things left in our culture where there is a check, like it has to go through. There's self-publishing today, but if you go through a publisher, an editor has to sign off, a entire publishing arm has to sign off, then outlets have to pick it up, etc. And so I think it's not necessarily wrong that guys want to write a book. There's some kind of stamp of, you have something that's worth saying, that really there just aren't too many places that do that anymore in our culture, where you just kind of get that stamp. But when I first wrote that, A Neglected Grace, and a publisher said Christian Focus was more than kind to published that book, someone who knew nobody and had written nothing, is I said, look, if I'm going to publish a book, or if I write any more books, I stop the day it's about money. I stop the day it's about people knowing who I am. I stop the day it's because I just want to write a book. I can't do that. That just seems to be a violation of my conscience. So books for me they're a lot of work. You'll notice I write small books. I write small books for a reason. And because they are a lot of work for me, but it's always an outgrowth of, I just feel like there's a space that needs to be filled here that hasn't been filled. And it's something that I'm doing in my own local context, and there's been some fruit from. And so maybe there's something that's helpful here beyond the people that I serve. It's something I can put in their hand, and then maybe it's something that goes beyond that.
That's really good. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. It's great to hear. Jason, with a little bit of time we've got left with you, would love to change the focus just a little bit from writing to reading. And one of the big things that we really want in our lives and our ministries, even through this podcast, is just to get good books into the hands of people to help them grow in their faith and grow in Christ likeness. And so would love to just talk with you a little bit about your reading, and well, maybe just to start off, like what are you reading right now?
Yeah, I'm always reading a stack of books. So when I'm in the car, I'm always listening to books. So this may kill me here on a podcast. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to music really ever. So I listen to books while I'm driving around. And so right now I'm listening to Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Man, is that a good book. It's a really good book for pastors. But she's taking 4 presidents and looking at their leadership during hard times. So listening to that, the books that I'm physically reading, just finished last night, 2 nights ago, The Indomitable Brainards. This gentleman, I forget who the author is, but wrote where he is looking at David Brainerd and John Brainerd, David's brother. And absolutely fascinating. Everybody knows David Brainerd. And, he ministered among the Indians for 3 years. His brother John, I don't remember the exact number of years, I'm going to make it up here, but he ministered among them for 37 years. There's a lesson there. But a wonderful little read on the Brainerd brothers. I am reading Digital Liturgies right now. I am reading Christopher Ashe on the Psalms right now. I am always reading Newton's Letters and Pilgrim's Progress. Those are part of my devotions almost daily, for sure weekly. What else am I reading right now? I'm reading a lot of books. I just finished a lot of books on Thanksgiving. So I just did we stopped, got this idea from Harry Reeder years ago, but in January, I don't preach expositionally through a book of the Bible. That's our normal study diet, morning, evening. In January, we take something that we just want to see more in the DNA of the church, and the elders decide on that. And I just preach through that in the morning and evenings, and then all of our small groups do studies on it, and all of our ministry areas are working that through in their ministry areas through the year. And so this year they wanted to do gratitude, which I'll confess, when they decide on that, I thought, oh, okay. I liked last year's a lot better. Confessionalism, like the year before that, a lot better. Pilgrims on their way to heaven. And this has been so good for my soul. preaching on gratitude. I've just finished a lot of books on Thanksgiving, gratitude, and this important discipline of the Christian life. Nancy Lee DeMoss Wogelmoose book is really good on that. Sam Crabtree's little book on it is really good. David or Daniel Powell, P-A-O, wrote a book in that Biblical Studies series. All those are golden, those gray books. He wrote one on Thanksgiving and Paul's letters in that series. That's really good. So just finished a host of those books, but I could go on. Always reading a lot of books.
Well, I was going to jump in and ask you some of your kind of habits with reading. I mean, I've already gleaned some of that. One of the questions I love to ask people is like, are you have to finish a book before you move on? Or I tend to read a little bit in 10 plus books at a given time because I don't know what I'm in the mood for to read on a given moment in my day. So it sounds like you're the same. But let me ask this question, Jason. You are a lead pastor of a healthy church, a lot of staff members I know you're pastoring and pouring into and caring for. You've got a family. You are on the executive council of the GRN. You're writing books. You're doing time to meet with podcasts and whatnot. How do you guard and fight for time to make sure you're reading for your own benefit? How do you protect that?
You know, Joe, I don't know that I've always done this well. I feel like I've gone through fits and starts over the 20 plus years of pastoring. What has worked for me over the last 5 plus years that I found really beneficial is I think it was Stott that first planted the idea in my head, and I adapted it to my benefit, what works for me. But I have an app on my phone that's called the Streaks app. And so what it does is it allows you to set up categories and to keep track of your streaks in those categories. And so I'm in a competition with myself in this Streaks app. But part of some of my streaks are to read 15 minutes a day outside of any sermon or teaching preparation. So 15 minutes a day. That's not devotional reading. That's not my Bible reading. That's not sermon prep. That's not teaching prep. It has to be books that I'm working through. So 15 minutes a day, read one morning a week, and read one day a month. So that's the goal. And then on years that I don't have a big writing project, I try and take 1 week of study leave and just read. So 15 minutes a day, one morning a week, one day a month, and 1 week a year. And then I'm stealing moments here and there. But I find that helps me. And look, I win. I beat myself every time on this app. So I just keep going.
I love that. I mean, I'm on Goodreads, the app, and part of the reason why I like it and why a number of friends like it is because you can get the satisfaction of logging. Hey, I've read. I'm kind of moving the chains a little bit, and so I'm gonna have to check out Streaks. But
okay, all right.
Well, that's a great framework, Jason. Thanks for sharing that. And well, I guess credit to John Stott for the framework, but how you shifted the time, I think, is just incredibly helpful because I think in John Stott's framework, it was like an hour a day, and then like and then a day a week or something, and a week a year or something like that. I mean, it was very different, and that's hard when you come to the end of the day. You've been ministering all day, you enjoy time with your family, you're about ready to fall asleep, and then you think, I didn't do my hour of reading. And you think, okay, well, there's no way that's happening. But if your goal is 15 minutes a day, you can sometimes, not always, but you can usually fight 15 minutes to stay awake and do some reading, and that just makes it so much more attainable. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, what it does is it stops the guilt, is what you're picking up on, Chris, because I can kill myself with guilt, and so it stops the guilt. But what often happens is you do 15 minutes and you get into a book and all of a sudden it's a half hour, right? Or it's 45 minutes. And that's what I find often happens. So look, Stott is 10 times was 10 times the theologian, 100 times theologian I'll ever be, and more well-read than I will ever be, but this is what works for me. So,
Yeah. And I think that's a great reminder too, when it comes to reading, there's not some objective standard that we're all trying to reach. We're doing it for our formation. We're doing it to become more like Christ. We're doing it to know God better and be better equipped to live as his saints. And we're all in different seasons and at different places and need different things. Just a great reminder of that.
Agreed.
Jason, we would love to know, we both, Joe and I, we just respect you so much, are so thrilled that you're joining us and have this chance. We would love to know, as you reflect on your life, your ministry, your faith, what have been some of those books, I don't know, 3 books, 5 books, that have been most formative for you throughout your life?
I'll give you the out, Jason.
Wow.
Sometimes you don't recommend those books because so you can either choose formative or your favorite. Yeah, however you want to answer the question.
Well, some of the ones that just shook my world. The first one that really shook my world was Jonathan Edwards' The End for Which God Created the World. When I read that, it was like a paradigm for life just shifted, and everything changed after I read that. So that was probably, over the course of my life, the most influential book. Newton's Letters. There's all kinds of volumes out there. A good starter volume is Banner of Truth puts it out. It's about that thick, about an inch thick, inch and a quarter, and Newton for me, he's one of the best pastors I've ever read. When you read his letters and you look at how he approaches somebody and how he approaches people differently based upon knowing where they're at or what they're wrestling through, and you can just see that pastoral mind just kind of churning. And there's incredible wisdom in the way that he approaches people and that he writes. And so Newton not only is good for my heart and my soul, he is good for me as a pastor in learning better how to pastor people. So Newton's Letters, and then it's probably Pilgrim's Progress. Besides the Bible, to me, that is the book everybody needs to read and keep rereading. I just think there is imagery there that will stick with you for life. And when that imagery sticks with you for life, those truths stick with you for life. And on my back wall here, on the 2 side walls here are 4 maps going through Pilgrim's Progress. So probably those 3 books have impacted me as much as any.
That's awesome. Yeah, Pilgrim's Progress is on that list for me for sure. I mean, what a wonderful book. I have had so many mentors who have said the same thing you just uttered. I mean, one brother, when I was young, just starting seminary, said, you should read this book every year. You should just every year read Pilgrim's Progress. Set like January 1st. You start it and finish it and just always live in it. And I thought it would be really, really helpful.
It's a good word.
Yeah. Jason, as we're finishing up, we got a few minutes here. I want to get you on time. But we thought it'd be fun. As you've probably picked up, we're asking you lots of questions on books you like and books that have been beneficial and what you're currently reading. The channel exists to talk about books and to get good books in front of people, but also to be blessed by what's a book that's impacted someone else. So what I'd like to do is play a quick game with you if you're all right with it. And so what we're going to do is because you're such a shepherd at heart and you write great books for people in the flock, I'm going to name a kind of church member. And I want you just to really rapid fire. Give me 1 or 2 books you would recommend. Obviously, we don't want to pastor just by book, but having a book, reading a book with someone can be a really helpful tool. And so if someone's listening to this and maybe they fit into one of these categories, they'd be benefit from hearing your answers. So let's just start off with, you have someone who just came to Christ, brand new Christian. has just joined the church, what's one or two books you want to put in their hands that you think would be the most beneficial?
Well, if they just come to faith in Christ, I mean, of course, the Bible, then maybe Basic Christianity by Stott, I think, is a good kind of intro primer. And I'm gonna start try and give them a view of just the basics of our faith. So anything that does that in that realm. But yeah, probably Stott's Basic Christianity would be the first.
Good. Okay, so how about a young
All right,
man?
rapid fire.
Think like senior in high school.
Yeah, J.C. Ryle's Thoughts for Young Men.
Great. How about a young couple that you are doing premarital counseling with?
Christopher Ash's book, Marriage for God.
How about a couple that's coming to you? Maybe they're having some struggles in marriage. What's a book on marriage that you would point them to? It could be the same answer.
Yeah, it could be that book. Others that come to mind would be Harvey's book, When Sinners Say I Do. It's a good little book along those lines. Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage. Piper has a good book on marriage, Momentary Marriage, I think it's called. Those books.
Okay. How about you've got a mature member in the congregation comes to you and says, I want to study systematic theology. What's the one that you reach for to give them a systematic?
Well, I think it's based upon who you first started reading and got gripped by. And I got gripped by Berkhoff, so I still go there. But the truth is, if it's not Berkhoff, then I'm probably, well, see, I go to Turretin would be my second, but I know Bavinck is all the rage today, and he is a little easier to read than Turretin, so probably Bavinck.
Stick with Berkhoff. That is
okay,
that's right where you need to be. Right where you need to be. How about you got a brand new, maybe a guy on your staff, young pastor, he's just got ordained, he's starting ministry. What would you say in terms of maybe ministry specific? What's like one book he really should prioritize?
Thomas Murphy's book, Pastoral Theology. It is golden. So it's out of print. It will get reprinted here. There's a couple publishers talking about it, but you can get it in one of those weird formats off Amazon. So, but it's out there.
You recommended that book a couple of years ago on some podcast or whatever. I went and hunted one down because of that, and it is
excellent.
It is golden.
It is golden.
It is. And then the last one, someone in your congregation struggling with assurance. What's a book that could be a sweet encouragement to them?
Well, I'm gonna close it out on a good Presbyterian answer because I think it's the best. I go to the Westminster Confession on assurance, chapter 17. I have probably used that chapter in pastoral ministry more than any other chapter in the confession. It is absolutely beautiful what the Westminster Divines do with assurance in that chapter. The sensitivity and the clarity that they have, and the challenge that is there, and just the pastoral touch. So I take people there and want to walk them through that. And, you can pull out a good commentary on the confession to help them there, but that's where I would point them.
Awesome. Well, Jason, we're at our time. I want to make sure we get you out of here, but thank you so much for making the time to talk with us. Like Chris mentioned, we both are so thankful for you, respect you, are so thankful that you are in the PCA, and we get the benefit just from knowing you and having a chance to be friends. So thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it.
It's been a delight to be with you.
Awesome. And if you are watching this and you've enjoyed this, please feel free to give us a like and to subscribe to the channel. We hope to have lots more conversations with authors and to keep talking about good books that might be a benefit to your soul. So thank you. Until next time, go enjoy a good book.